There are times when my son was younger where I wish that, there was two of them so they can entertain each other.
Mm.
I'm okay with the decisions, and since I didn't have to give birth to anybody, so.
Hello and welcome to the Dad Dialogue podcast, the show where we talk about the successes and the stresses of becoming a dad and being a dad. I am your host, Laurence. Thank you so much for being with us today for the very first episode of 2025. Before we introduce today's guest, a quick reminder, you can go over to daddialogue.co.uk if you would like to sign up to be a guest on a future episode or get in touch with the show in another way. Joining me today is Anson. Anson is based in the US, has a teenage son, and in our conversation we talk about schooling, we talk about having an only child, we talk about encouraging our children to take responsibility, make decisions, lots and lots and lots of things to talk about. So without further ado, let's get into the conversation. So Anson, thank you so much for taking the time joining us here on the Dad Dialogue podcast. Can you just start off by telling our listeners just a little bit about yourself and your family?
Yeah, sure, Laurence. Thanks for having me, first of all. And yeah, we're based out of Denver, Colorado. My wife and I have lived here most 90% of our lives or more, and we have a 14-year-old son. So we're only child, kind of one and done type thing. And yeah, my wife works in kind of the accounting world, and I work in the real estate world. And yeah, our son just started high school, a couple months ago. So that's all new to us. And yeah, that's kind of us in a nutshell.
We're definitely interested to get into the high school and some of the challenges that's brought. But I'm curious, as you said, one and done, that classic phrase. What was it like? Did you both go into your partnership, your relationship, knowing that that's what you guys intended? Did you you were always on the same page?
That's a great question. I think there wasn't a ton of pre-planning on like quantity of children or anything like that. I mean, for a while, we both were just fine not having kids. We've been married since 2001. And so we went, a good 9 years without kids. And then before deciding to have kids. And my wife comes from a family where she has two other siblings. I come from a family with two other siblings. I obviously, we both value, having other siblings and having those relationships. As annoying as they were when you're little, when you're older, you can value them a bit more. But when it came to having our own kids, my wife got pregnant. We were super excited. Went through the whole process. She didn't have a difficult pregnancy at all, and then didn't have a difficult delivery or anything like that. When it came up, maybe 6 to 12 months after our son was born, she was just kind of like, I did not enjoy being pregnant, and the delivery process was terrifying. And so for her, she was basically like, I'd like to be done. And, as a one part contributor to the process, and I don't have to deliver the child, I don't have to birth the child. it was just like, okay, like we're going to do our best with, the one that we got. And so, no, there's no like bad feelings or anything about it. Like I really, really want another one. There are times when my son was younger where I wish that, there was two of them so they can entertain each other. But besides that, I'm okay with the decisions, and since I didn't have to give birth to anybody, so
it's a very good way to look at things. But I'm sure there are so many people that have two kids that they don't regret having two kids, but they kind of would say a similar thing to you. It's like there are moments where like things might have been easier or better or more fulfilling or more challenging, like with one kid, and it's kind of that balancing act that we have to face. I do think it's really important though just to hear these sorts of stories from an aspect of, I've spoken to a lot of guys who aren't sure when to have that conversation. They're like, oh, so my newborn or like my baby is 2 months old, and I'm going to go talk to my wife and tell her that I don't want to have another kid. I'm just like, probably leave it for a while, 2 months in, like it's probably
Yeah,
not the
right.
time. You kind of got to let the dust settle and kind of work out being parents. But yeah, I think you said
Yeah.
6 months to a year. That sounds about right to kind of start having those conversations, because you can't rush into it. And
Yeah.
those conversations can take a long time as well, can't they?
Yeah, and I think it was more casual. It was just kind of like, are we gonna do this again? And it wasn't. I think it seems like people are a little bit more deliberate about family planning these days, of kind of like consciously having these decisions and conversations. Whereas, my wife and her sister are like 13 months apart, so you can do the math on that, and you go like, wow,
Well,
like
yeah.
obviously not a planned thing. And it feels like people are a lot more deliberate about 2 years after the first one, we're gonna try for the second one, and they have these kind of things worked out, whereas these kind of oops babies aren't as prevalent as maybe in the past. But I could be myopic about that too. So
Well, I think it's important to think about, though, that I know this is just to think about. I mentioned this to other guys, that you can't just decide to have a kid. Like, that's not just
right.
all right. Now we're ready to start, and that's why we. So my two boys are just under 2 years apart. We never
Okay.
necessarily planned for that to happen. It was more of a case of like, we had quite a lot of friends in our circles that were really struggling to even get pregnant for a first time, or get or have a baby. Like we knew some people that went through miscarriage and things. So we just didn't want to kind of, we wanted to allow whatever was going to happen was going to happen. We couldn't have a
Okay.
perfect plan for it. We wanted exactly 3.5 year gap, because you could get to 3.5 years and something could happen. So
Sure.
we were just like, well, just let whatever happens happen. So I kind of resonate a little bit with that. It's like we weren't as kind of so deliberate. We were just like, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So let's circle back to high school. I'm curious, as your son is now starting high school, what have you found to be some of the biggest challenges from a parent's perspective as him starting high school?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a lot of growth. It's been a lot more growth for me, I think, than I thought it would be, to go through this process of elementary school, middle school, high school. And for me, it's a lot about, at this point, having a 14-year-old. It's a lot more about letting go of certain things and certain controls, so that he can figure those things out for himself.
Right.
And when they're little, it's like lockdown. It's like you give them a little box to explore and play around in. Everything else is safety and baby proofed, and they can't go out of from their blanket or something, like when they're little. And I think parts of your psyche stay there. They're like, I can't let them run down the street and go hang out with friends. But that's my reality now, is dropping him off at the mall to hang out with his friends. He's unsupervised for 2.5 hours, wandering around. But not only that, but it's also, schoolwork and work at home, like chores and stuff like that. And, all of these things that you try to, I guess, consciously kind of build up so that they can, in 4 years or so, go out on their own if they really want to do that, and they can actually survive as an adult human. I don't know how we did it, but yeah, so a lot of those things are hyper conscious on my mind, of things that I have to let go, because I can't, I can control them. I can force him to do things and get the grades that he wants, but that's not teaching him anything. So I have to go through the anxiety of giving him the tools and letting him work with those tools and create his own tools and find his own way on certain things. And so a lot of that was unexpected. I had no idea that that's what, half of my time would be consumed with, is in my brain going like, okay, it's okay to let go. It's okay, because he has to figure it out. And I think every parent goes through that in some way. I just didn't know that was a thing. Nobody told me.
So I'm curious. So it's a little bit different where I grew up in England. We just have a primary school and then a secondary school, and then we go off to college when we're 16 for like the 2 years before like a university. So when at 14, that's an interesting age. How much impact do they have on like the choice, like choosing a high school and that process of like transitioning from middle school to high school? What are those sort of impacts on a child and a family?
Yeah. I think for the most part, so in our area we have elementary school, so it's K through fifth grade. 6, 7, 8 is at middle school. 9, 10, 11, 12 is at high school. And most of the time, I would say probably the majority of people, they're in a school system. Let's just say they live in the same place. They're not changing schools. They live in the same place for those 12 years. They're basically going to go to the neighborhood elementary school, the middle school that feeds into, and then the high school that middle school feeds into. So there's not a ton of choice for most parents. They just go, the choice is where you move for the most part. So if you want, like I'm in real estate, so I understand school districts and the impact on decision making. So they go, somebody goes, I want to move to where there's good schools, and there's, their kids will go through that school progression. There are, parents who will change up, they'll like choice into another school if it's better for their kid, for, if they're either have, learning issues. They might choose a school that's kind of better at that. Or if they're super advanced, there are schools that are better for advanced placement and stuff. For us, the high school that he was going to go to for public school is a great school. My wife actually graduated from there, so she hates that idea of her kid going to the same high school that she did. I didn't realize this until a couple months ago, how much she did not like that idea.
Really
but
interesting.
it is a good school. We do live not far from where she grew up, so it's a great school. Great school district, probably one of the top 1 or 2 in the state. But we also had an opportunity to perhaps send him to a private school. So we have a Jesuit school that's like 7 miles from us, where we both had friends who went there when we were in high school. And so, it's not a whole brand new experience. And, we had no idea what the school was about. We have a pretty good idea what it's about. And my wife has coworkers who have had kids go through there. And so we said, you know what? We have one kid. And I don't know if anybody else goes through this mental math on on an only child, but it's like we have one chance to basically do everything right, and we have less expenses because we don't have 3 kids to put through private school, that kind of thing. So so when it came time to 7th grade or so, which feels early, but 7th grade or so, we started looking at high school. We toured both schools in 7th and 8th grade, and we left the decision up to my son. Just said, look, you've toured both campuses. You've gone to their 8th grade school night. You've had a chance to kind of look to see what, the campuses, the teachers, the programs, everything else. What would you like to do? And that was important to us because we didn't want to this is your only choice. You don't have a say in it. So part of that letting go, having them choose pieces makes them a little bit more invested, I think. And so he ended up choosing the private school, and we went full bore on application, all of that stuff. And he got accepted in February of last year. And, and then it was just okay, this is what we're doing. So that's where he ended up for high school.
Okay, cool. And what are the kind of the main differences, kind of on the face of it?
Sure.
And are those main differences the same from a parent's perspective and the child's perspective? Because it sounds like you've given him a lot of say. So I'm curious if the two of you kind of saw the similar things.
Sure. Yeah. And we went through pros and cons, and we went through his concerns on things. I kind of have a funny story maybe later of how like 2 weeks before high school started, how he tried to change his mind, but it was
Right.
for it was for it is for fun reasons. But
Okay.
the differences are kind of night and day.
Mm.
The class sizes are much smaller.
Yeah.
So at that public school, I think that the class sizes are close to 25 to 30 kids
Mhm.
per class. And right now, I think it's an average of somewhere around 15
Yeah.
per
Wow.
class. So he has a lot more interaction with his teachers, which is good for him. And
Yeah.
then class length. So they do an every other day class system. So he has 80-minute periods instead of like a 45-minute period. So instead of having 8
Mm.
periods a day, he has like 4. So he's
Right.
in those classes for longer.
Mm.
And then a big one is single sex education. So
Mm.
he, it is, they do have boys and girls division, but for their
Hmm.
main classes, they're separated. Um,
Right.
so he's in a class with 15 boys,
Hmm.
and similar freshmen on the girls' side are in their classes with 15 girls. They do
Mm.
have a quad, and they have I guess it's kind of a more of a college experience for some parts
Mm.
of it, where they have like a quad and they intermingle for extracurriculars and some of the sports and some of those things are co-ed.
Mm.
But for their main core classes for all 4 years, it's going to be just boys. And
Okay.
so, after looking at like the stats on, what single sex education does for boys, it made a
Mm.
lot of sense. It's something like 25% improvement on GPA without having the
Okay. Wow.
distraction of girls
Mm.
or whatever that is, whatever the reasons are. But
Mm.
and it also benefits girls because girls have more leadership roles in their classes and they're
Mm.
more apt to pursue STEM careers. And
Mm.
so, um, those are some big differences from, and the school itself is a lot smaller. So his
Right.
entire freshman class is about 400 between the boys and
Okay.
girls, and it would be over double that size at the public school. So the public
Wow.
school has a
Okay.
much larger campus, bigger
Mm.
class sizes, and the overall freshman class is like 900 to 1,000 kids.
Mm. Cool. And what was his opinion on? I'm curious about the same sex classes. I'm curious what his opinion on that was.
He hasn't said anything negative about it. When it has come up, there's been some kind of funny stories about, I was like, well, what's it like to have a classroom with all boys? And he
Mm.
was complaining that he was saying that one of his teachers was complaining that, that the boys need to go outside if they want to fart, basically. And like, it's a total freshman thing, right? Um,
Yeah.
so and you probably wouldn't do that in a classroom with girls in it, but
Mm.
and so, but overall, he's enjoying kind of like that, I guess that kind of brotherhood aspect
Yeah.
of just hanging out with the friends and the guys, and having that kind of experience, he says has been good for him. So
That's really interesting, and I haven't heard of a place that kind of has kind of separate divisions like that. My wife
yeah.
went to an all-girls school, and
Hmm.
she's a teacher, and I used to be a teacher, so we've spoken a lot about same-sex schools and this sort of thing, and the decisions
Hmm.
that we make in the future. The thing is in England, traditionally, a lot of boys' schools are boarding schools, and
Mm.
where they stay there, for the term time,
Yep.
and maybe come home on the weekend for like a short time. And I think a lot of the stories I hear from boys' schools are because they're boarding schools and not because they're all boys' schools. The stories are crazy violence that happens in the boarding
Mm.
homes side of things. So, like, there's sometimes, at
Wow.
least anecdotally, there can be some negativity towards boys' education because, like, you get a load of boys and sort of testosterone as they're going through puberty, and like it all kind of gets to a head. But I quite like the idea that it's like they still are on the same campus as these girls, and
Yep.
they are still having some shared spaces. And I think that was probably quite a good way to regulate themselves. And definitely, I mean, I think it'd be difficult to find an adult that would say, without the distraction of the other sex back in high school, like, I'm pretty sure everyone would identify that. They might do a little bit better, focus a little bit more on the studies.
Yeah, for sure. We are like, it is a unique school. I think we're the only one in the States that has a
Okay, wow.
co-divisional. And we don't like, I don't think boarding schools exist. Like I couldn't even find one if I wanted to, probably on the East Coast somewhere.
Right. Okay.
But I could totally understand that point. And thankfully, looking through the stats on the school and everything like that, like they don't have a lot of those issues, thankfully. But I think that boarding environment could be like, you're with these guys all day, you're with them all through the night. That would be, I mean, for me as a parent, that would be really hard just to send your kid, like as a middle schooler, just be like, okay, well, you live over there now. that'd be tough, man.
But it's ingrained in some of the British culture. Like obviously a lot of the top British kind of secondary schools, they're known for being that. And I think in modern times, like even some of the older ones that are boarding schools, they have day pupils as well, like day students. So it's kind of like you can choose. But yeah, I mean, I think there is quite a lot of that aspect of life. Yeah, it's just right. Now it's time, off you go, sort of thing.
Yep, off you go. And I guess if that's the culture, then it's not weird. But for me, that would be hard to like let go that much.
Yeah, at that early, like when they're a teenager. I know a couple of people that went through that, like that did it as a kid of that age, like kind of in my circles. But yeah, I mean, I think most people still go to typical day schools in England.
Yeah. That's good.
So let's dive into your successes. As we were chatting before via email, you shared quite a lot of different really interesting things with me. So I'm curious, what would you say right here, right now? What's your biggest success as a parent?
Yeah. So I guess when you start to hear like the things that you drone on about, at least to them, it sounds like you're droning, you're lecturing or something, and they kind of tune out, and you can literally watch them just check out. It's an interesting success as a parent when you actually realize that they are paying attention on some level.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's through just like repetition or what, but so that example of that would be, going from doing, I guess, the bare minimum to like showing your coaches and teachers that you actually want to be there. And that's not inherent to every kid. I definitely didn't do it when I was a kid. As an adult, I could totally succeed as a teenager these days. Like if I just put me back in a teenager body, and I would be, the best example of a teenager, but that's not how it works. So, when I talk to him about like, look, when the coach, he runs cross country. So when something shows up as optional, like an optional practice, an optional, academic support time, like, hey, their teachers have office hours, and so you can go in and see them before school or during academic support. It's like these things are optional, but if you take advantage of them, it can't hurt you. Like it'll never hurt you. And so that came to a head when, in the process of kind of letting go and letting him make his own decisions on a lot of things. When he comes to me and he says, look, like, hey, Dad, I want to go to that Saturday run. Can I, that it's an optional practice. Can I go? And it's like, yeah, of course. And his reasoning is that he does want to hang out with his friends who are in cross country, but he also wants to, show the coaches that he is going, above and beyond, and he's showing up, and he actually cares about it. And then also academically, he's been doing, I'll go and pick him up from school, and he'll say like, hey, I used academic support to go see my Spanish teacher because I know that there's a quiz coming up. And it's like, holy, like, I don't have to tell him this stuff anymore.
Wow. That's cool.
And so, hearing your own words of advice coming back to you as success stories is like, I think the greatest success of a parent could ever be, and so those are recent successes that I think that have shown me like, hey, they do pay attention. They are listening, and when they have those wins on their own, it's so much better than when you force them to go like force them to study and then they get a good grade, that doesn't feel as good as that internal motivation of, I took the time to do some extra studying. I got the grade that I wanted. I win, and so
Yep.
for them to have those wins on their own is so much sweeter than your parents kind of making you get those wins,
So, I mean, I guess the $1 million question that everyone's wanting me to ask you is like, what's the secret? How do you make that happen?
Oh man, if I had that, I could sell 1 billion books for sure. I think, I think it just comes down to like communication of, I guess like it's not an easy answer, but like a kind of a constant communication of values and of, making things that don't seem like a long lecture. Like now I'll recognize when I'm kind of just giving too much information or going over the top on stuff, because I'll kind of see him kind of check out. And I'll just say, hey, we'll revisit this later. Or if you have any questions, let me know, or if you have anything that you want to add, please do. But I'm not going to go on and on. You know what to do. It's, it's your turn to do it, And so I think that that's come a long way, at least in the last like 3-4 years, going from 5th grade to high school. It doesn't feel like that long, but they go from like 10 to 14 so quick that it's like there's so much development that happens in that area. And like there is a book that I read that kind of really changed my mindset on a lot of that stuff, and it's geared towards boys. It's called He's Not Lazy. I think that it's Dr. Adam Price, something like that. But it kind of goes through that mentality of like, your son's not opting out. He's just not internally motivated.
Yeah.
And so it goes through like reasons why, communication styles, things that you can sit down and talk about, that get through. And so, all of our best conversations as parent to child happens in the car. Like, honestly, these days, he's going to be in his room and he'll be working on stuff, or he'll be doing something or talking to friends. Like, that's not where those important conversations always happen. It's like kind of when we're a little isolated, there's no other distractions really. And, and so even to the point where I'm like, encouraging my wife to go pick him up more, because those she'll even say like, hey, we talked about like his day. I didn't have to ask him about, friends, or I didn't have to ask him about anything. He was just open to talk about it.
Yeah.
And for me, I do a lot of the picking up and dropping off because my wife's busy at work, but I'm like, yeah, that's where a lot of these conversations happen is the car. And I think I've read a different book that kind of mentions that, where it's like, funny enough, your teenager, all of these things happen when you're driving somewhere. And it's true. It's crazy. I don't know why, but it is.
That's interesting. That's a really interesting thing to pick up on and just kind of and hone in on for sure. And I just want to add, I think maybe less so once a boy or girl is 14, but I think I'm not knowing the ins and outs of your household or your values or whatever, but I would imagine that another part of this happening is you guys as parents like practicing what you preach in terms of encouraging him to work hard and teaching him about your values. So well and good sitting in the car and having a heart-to-heart about how important it is to work hard and do something, for you then to get home and sit on your phone for 3 hours on the couch eating whatever. Like, and I think maybe less so when they're 14, but definitely when they're like pre-10, it's so obviously when I used to teach, I taught 6 and 7 year olds, and it was so obvious when one of these kids would do something or say something that is just fully them copying their parents. Because you're like, well, no 6 or 7 year old is going to come to express that feeling or that thought or that action in that way unless they've seen their parent do it many times before. And that could be a positive thing or a negative thing. And I think that's such a key thing. I talk to a lot of parents who are in that process of making sure that they're kind of checking themselves first or what they're modeling to their kids. So it might not have been
Right.
something that you were purposefully thinking about, but I'm sure with a 14-year-old that you're able to talk so highly of now, that must have been something that happened within your household.
Yeah, no, that is a really good point. I think that modeling behavior is huge.
Mm,
And a lot of that revolves around, I guess, these days devices,
mm,
phones, like you said. Like, do you uh do you sit around on your phone all the time and then tell them to not be on their phone?
yeah.
That's like, that's some serious, like, he's at the point where he'll call out hypocrisy, which
Yeah.
is scary. So it's like, you got to be on
Oh
top of your
gosh.
game.
Yeah.
But like, I'm 45. I grew up with video games. I introduced him to video games, but I try to not model a behavior where it's like, that's the norm, is me being on. I don't have time anymore, but I can't be
Mm,
on like video games for 12 hours on a Saturday.
mm,
That's not modeling good behavior, to
mm,
him. And so yeah, there is that consciousness of intentionally modeling behavior. and
yep.
and a lot of that's screen time. A lot of that's the you know the things that we do. Like, we'll go hike, and we'll go do stuff on the weekends, and we'll try to get out and model an active
Mm,
lifestyle. And it doesn't always rub off on everything, but there are things that definitely rub off on, if it's normal to sit in front of a TV for 16 hours on Saturday for your family, then don't be too surprised when that's what your kids want to do too.
yeah, for sure. And I appreciate you segues you asked mentioning the activities and getting out, going hiking, because you had mentioned to me about that he was exposed to kind of Boy Scouts and Cubs, and he spent a lot of time
Mhm.
doing that. And then you mentioned to me that he showed a real passion for fishing. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. Kind of out of the blue. So he ended up quitting Scouts at the beginning of last year. No, beginning of this year. No,
Mm,
yes, beginning of this year. We had been in doing Boy Scouts since first grade,
okay.
and he's been enjoying it. There is like a big fall off at seventh and eighth grade for
Mm,
Scouts. I was heavily involved in leadership, just something that you do as you. I think everybody gets suckered into that, but it was actually really rewarding. So I can't
mm,
complain too much. Um, and it came to a point where he wasn't really progressing, and he wasn't internally motivated to do
mm,
the extra stuff on the side, and do stuff like that. And
mm,
so he was kind of like, can we try like not doing that, not
mm,
going to Scouts? And it was like, okay, it kind of sucked, because there was there's a lot of memories and a lot of things that we've shared through that experience. And then before summer started, I try to put a little bit of structure into breaks, so it's not just
mm.
free for all.
Yeah.
Where it's just a little bit of like, hey, there's just a little bit of time where, at least this summer when he's preparing for high school, there was some classes and stuff that he had to do over the summer, and he had a sports camp that was for cross country. But I was like, look, if there's anything else that you want to do, like for the summer, if you want to go up to the mountains, if you want to, whatever it is, put it on
Mm,
a list of things that you want to do. And he put, like, out of the blue, he just put fishing. He's like, I want to go fishing. And I was like,
interesting.
okay, well, we haven't done that for a few years. Like, Scouts hadn't
Okay.
done it for a couple of years, but
Right.
but it was honestly a ton of fun, like, for us to
Mm,
go. And like, I busted out my grandfather's fishing stuff that he left to us.
wow.
We went all through it to see what he had and see what we needed. We had to buy like one or two little things, but we had everything else that we needed. And then it was just about making time to go do that. Like, I let him go. There's an app where you can kind of look up fishing activity in your area, like where people have
Right.
caught things. It's kind of I let him look through it, choose some fishing places that we can go
Mm,
to. Like, a lot of them are in town, 20 minutes away, 30 minutes away. We actually live probably like 5 minutes from a full blown like reservoir, and about
wow.
another 10 minutes from another reservoir. But we had zero luck there this summer, man. It was terrible. Like for the closest places that we could go to, we didn't catch anything there. But
Of course.
it was just really cool just to see him. Like I let him take over the tackle box. He could arrange it however he wanted. It was basically his now. I don't like fishing, honestly,
I
but
was going to ask that.
yeah, but I was fully invested in
Yeah.
getting him to where he wanted to go and letting him do what he wanted to do. And there was times, I'd bring my own pole and I'd cast and I'd try my best to catch fish. But I didn't catch anything over the summer. He caught, a dozen or more.
Oh,
And
wow.
he was always like, I feel bad because you didn't catch anything. And I'm like, that's not why I'm here. Like, I'm here to help you catch fish. Like I get zero enjoyment from catching a fish. I get all my enjoyment from watching you catch fish and helping
Yeah.
you and, being there with the pliers to get the hooks out of its mouth or whatever, but, or driving you there. And we get to have these conversations and we listen to some audiobooks and stuff in the car, which is fun. And so, but for him to come up with that idea fully on his own and then execute, I'm there to help him execute.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's such a nice story to hear. And I'm curious in terms of the time. There might be parents out there thinking, "Oh, this sounds so wonderful. How can I ever make the time to do that or find the time to do that?" How do you kind of structure your time to ensure that, like those memories that you've made over that summer, that you talk about them now so positively? I'm sure he'll remember them. So how do you kind of make sure you make time for that?
Yes, some of that's planning. There was a couple times where I had to say basically no. He was like, "Can we go tonight?" And it'll be like 5 o'clock, and the sun goes down at 8. And it was, if I could make it happen, I would do it. But there was a couple times where I couldn't. So I just said, look, if you tell me the day before, I'll just make sure that, everything's taken care of. So where we can go do that. And since fishing is typically like early morning or late, like right around sunset, those were kind of easy times in our schedule, at least, to do those things. He even had a running camp where one of the days was at like around this big park in Denver called Washington Park, but they have like 3 fishing areas there. And so we would just go like an hour 15 minutes early. He could fish for an hour, go do 3, 4, 5 miles of running, and then we were already there, so he could fish for another hour or so before it got a little bit too hot and nothing was happening. But so we structured around our own schedule, but also I just told him, like, look, if you tell me the day before, I can make almost anything happen. If you tell me like an hour before, it can happen, but don't always like bet on it. So thankfully we do live close to a couple areas. And so it was, a 5-minute drive, an hour out there fishing, 5-minute drive home. Those were the easy ones. And we didn't go much further than like an hour away. Here in Denver, we have a lot of opportunities for outdoor stuff. So so we around our own schedule and then make time for it. For us late at night, it's pretty easy to do. So
that's really cool. And I think, the way you described that day of going for a running meet and fishing before and then fishing after, there must be so many parents of 14-year-olds that are like, God, all my son wants to do is sit on his iPad or the Xbox or, on a summer holiday. Like, for them to have that motivation to spend a couple of hours fishing and then, a few miles running, that's really cool. And like, it's kind of sowing those seeds now when they're 14, and who knows what it might lead to in terms of like next steps with running or next steps with fishing or whatever it might be. But no, that's really cool to kind of like be able to foster that positive environment. To change it up a little bit, we spoke about successes, and it was awesome to hear all these things. But what would you say is your biggest stress as a parent?
Yeah, so a lot of my stress is a lot of it's internal. For me, I kind of agonize over the choices that we make inside of parenting. Like, you can't handcraft like a perfect experience for your kids.
Yeah.
But I think if you're intentional about how you're doing things, the better. So I always think kind of when my son's older, when he's in his 20s or 30s, or he has his own kids, how he's going to reflect and think back about these times, has everything gone perfectly for, my business or my wife's business and career? And, have we had like that idyllic, lifestyle that you kind of think about when you're in your 40s? Probably not. But like, I always want him to look back on these times and, remember them positively, So I think about that probably way too much, honestly. But, we've, and I have it kind of up here on in my office as a kind of a motto for myself of like, creating basically like creating experiences that we can enjoy instead of like collecting material things. We go out and we try to enjoy, life. And so part of me is just that internal struggle of like, during his 7th and 8th grade years, is he going to remember this as a bad time because of XYZ, or is he not? And it's interesting because, the older they get, it's crazy when he can recall something from when he was 3 or 4. He'll be like, oh, I remember when we went out to Disney World, and we did, XYZ. That one hotel had that, that slide that came out of the pyramid. And you're like, I had no idea that you would remember those things. But like, I guess in my head, I just, I'll take myself out of the present to kind of think about those things. And then I have to remember, like, you can't be perfect. You can just do your best. And honestly, like, I always just remember the times that I had just spending with my dad. I don't remember like the things that we necessarily did. But the time itself was the precious thing. So, so I have to constantly remind myself that, like, come back to the present. It doesn't necessarily matter everything little thing that we're doing. It matters that we're present, that we're here, and that we're, that we're creating at least positive memories, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you can't control, like, it's interesting you said that he remembered that moment from Disney World, because I actually spoke to someone a couple of episodes back, hasn't been published yet, but we recently returned from Disneyland in Paris for a little trip. We actually went to celebrate mine and my wife's anniversary. We like dragged the kids along with us. And we've been to Disneyland quite a lot, actually. To have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, they've both been to 3 different Disneylands because we used to live in Asia, so we've been to 2 different Disneylands in Asia.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of experience with Disneyland, and it's always a memory for me, or at least a thing for me to think about. It's like there's no guarantee. So like my oldest is nearly 4. He had like some really good times. He got a bit scared with one of the rides we went on, actually, but he got to meet Spider-Man, and there was all these really cool things. But there's absolutely no guarantee that when he is 14, that's one of the things he brings up. He could mention something completely different, like a little walk we've gone on near our house and like something fun happened, or similarly, it could be something negative that happens. Like, so the thing I always think about is that someone told me about the dishes will stay dirty, like, for as long as they're there, but your son's not always going to be asking you to go and play with him. So that's one of the things that I really struggle with sometimes. Is like after dinner, like he might just want like that quick little like time, like some of my time. And it's like, it's obviously at the end of the day and you've just got these things to do. Like, I don't want him to remember that. So I have to kind of remind myself, like you said, it's not about future. It's not about me having an easy evening and getting all the dishes done and like the house clean and tidy. It's investing in the present of what we have here right now. Because I would hate for him to be 14 and for him to just remember, oh, yeah, after dinner, you'd never come and play with me with my blocks when I asked you. Like, that would be like, that's this, like the agonizing that I have at this stage. I'm right there with you in terms of that being like a big stress of life.
Right. Yeah, no. And you never understand, you never realize when it's going to be the last time that you do something. Like, I never realized the last time when my son would play with blocks, or like I want to sit down and watch, some show that he liked.
Yeah,
it was just like one day he did, and then the next day he didn't.
Yeah.
So you just never know.
You never know. The one that my wife often reminds me, because it's getting close now with both of them, is they're picking them up, because we're at that stage now where they still ask to be picked up, and like my oldest is nearly 20 kilos. I don't know what that is in pounds, but he's pretty big boy. So he's still asked to be picked up. When we were at Disneyland, actually, he was very lazy. He didn't like walking a lot. So there was a lot of carrying to get to the different places. Yeah, it is. Yeah. But yeah, like that's the thing my wife always says to me, is that like she won't know the last time that she like picks up him or the younger one as well. But there's just like that then just triggers the next stage of life that we can then invest into. And I think that's kind of what we're saying, is that present is so important. Like just being present with what we're having right now, because you never know
for sure
when things change. Well, we've flown through the time. I'm surprised. I feel like we've been talking for a short amount of time, but we're definitely coming up to the end. So the last question I always like to ask dads and get them to think about is, if you to flash back to before you became a father for the first time, so 14, 15 years ago, is there a piece of advice you think that Anson back then could have done with hearing before welcoming his son into the world?
Yeah, it's going to be like pretty similar to the vein that we were just in, is just going to be present and enjoy, enjoy every moment, because they grow up fast. So those those things are super important. And so, no matter how hard the day is, or no matter how crazy things get, like you are, responsible for this small human and their development, and enjoy it.
Yeah, definitely. No, I couldn't agree more. And as a parent to young kids right now, I need those reminders very frequently. It's like it's right here, right now. It's they will go up quickly, and before I know it, I'll be facing down high school with them, and thinking back to these times. So, Anson,
it won't be long. Yeah.
Really lovely chatting to you today. Thank you so much for opening up and just sharing about your experience. Sounds like you and your wife have made a wonderful home and a wonderful partnership for your son. So thank you so much for sharing with us and joining us the Dad Dialogue podcast today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And there we have another Dad Dialogue conversation. Of course, a huge thank you goes out to Anson for coming on the show and sharing his stories with us. I really enjoyed talking to Anson. The time absolutely flew by, and I really like to hear the different ways that Anson has arrived at his son kind of taking this responsibility of his decisions and being able to make some of his own decisions, especially when it comes to schooling, and investing in his own kind of school life and other hobbies as well. It was really interesting to hear about how he arrived at really enjoying fishing, for example. And these are sorts of things that I often think about as my sons grow up, and things that I ponder and wonder about, how am I going to get the most out of this area of their life. So I really appreciated talking to Anson today. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. A quick reminder, again, you can go over to daddialogue.co.uk if you'd like to sign up or get in touch with the show in any other way. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you have an awesome day. I hope to talk to you again soon. Goodbye.